we're going to have a talk here at the macro and micro level. So we're going to have representatives from LA County, Chief Sustainability Office, and Miami-Dade Mayor's Office. We're going to hear from Galen, who's going to be overseeing climate and economic development. Then we'll have a micro sort of level discussion with some practitioners from Prosperity Market and Hyperlocal farms. So we're going to talk about heat. We're going to talk about food. We're going to talk about economic development. We're going to talk about it at a macro level and a micro level. And I think I have about 15 minutes to do all of that. So it'll be really more of a teaser of some of these individuals and what they're doing and the amazing work that they're operating in. So I'm going to invite Rita, Galen, Nick as well, and Carmen or Prosperity Market, Kara or Carmen from Prosperity Market, if they're here. I've tried to meet most of you already, but it's a large group. Thank you for joining. I'm going to try to cycle through this fairly quickly, but we have representatives here. We have Rita Kampalath from Chief Sustainability Officer, LA Chief Sustainability Office. We have Galen Truer from Miami-Dade. Thank you for making it out here, Galen. The reason you're here is we have our Venture Fellows program runs both in Los Angeles and in Miami. And we have Nick. We have Nick Metropulos from Hyperlocal Farms. I've had the pleasure of visiting your facility. I've had the pleasure of visiting with Prosperity Market as well. And I wanted to first, talk about, in I think 2019, there was a chief resiliency initiative, right, that was put together. And I know in 2021, 2022, there was a climate resilience action plan in Miami-Dade. So with the theme of implementation, I'd love to hear from each of you on, since that report was put together and since those initiatives were launched within the Chief Sustainability Office and within Miami-Dade, at the mayor's purview, can you share a little bit about some of the implementation of those initiatives within such large geographies, and how do you start to bite at the apple when you're looking at so many different things you can look at: buildings, energy, transportation, land, water, and waste. So you can take your time there, Rita and Galen, and then we'll get at the micro level with Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? This is coming through. Okay. Thanks for having me here. This is great. Like Carlos mentioned, we had our sustainability plan, which was completed in 2019 and adopted by the Board of Supervisors. It was an interesting planning process, trying to plan for a county as large as LA. Even though our board, really like our main governance is over the unincorporated areas, we really wanted to think regionally about our plan, because obviously a lot of the issues that we're talking about cross a lot of jurisdictional boundaries. So there was a huge stakeholder engagement process that went with that. Of course, unfortunately, it was adopted in fall of 2019. Just a few months later, the pandemic hit. And the county very quickly shifted its priorities as like the public health agency for 86 out of the 88 cities. That was really heavily our focus. So in terms of implementation, there were a lot of things we worked on. Actually, one of the things that came up was food equity, because our office was engaged in food distribution work. And so that became a big focus, and one of the things that we worked with Larta on as well. But in addition, specifically about climate resilience, one of the first things that we did was create a climate vulnerability assessment for the county. And that was one of the priorities in the sustainability plan. Again, it's an assessment, not like a huge plan or a lot of programs that came out of it. But the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because one of the things that came up as we were doing our planning process was the need for more intentional planning with climate and climate resilience, climate vulnerability in mind. So that was one of the first things we did, is really did like a very data-driven assessment of where vulnerabilities exist in the county. Somebody brought up like a lot of bad things happening in the county. We're actually named as FEMA's riskiest county in the country, in LA. So it was really important that we kind of create that data to really guide all of our other implementation that's gone forward. So I'll pause there because I know we don't have too much time.
Yeah. Galen?
Yeah, I'll just try and build on that a little bit. So I think one of the key things is that local government is driving this action, and some of it's politics, right? And some of it is just the reality that we have the responsibility and we can't move out of that risk. So we also have a resilience action plan, or a resilience plan that came out, strategy that came out in 2019, but it wasn't detailed enough. And so we released climate action strategy and a sea level rise strategy in 2021. And now we're trying to implement those because they're not even detailed enough to actually say, well, okay, what are you doing, right? And as part of that implementation, the mayor took me out of the planning area and said, okay, work in economic development, because we have to do this with the private sector, which is why I'm here. So when Larta came to Miami, they ran into me. And I was like, yeah, please, can we be the second city that you work with? Or the site? And it wasn't even the city, it's the whole region, right?
South Florida.
South Florida, it goes from Palm Beach down to Miami-Dade or Monroe County, and then we're almost the size of LA, but not quite. And so it's just really complicated, and I think that we're doing really exciting things, and you guys are the FEMA's most vulnerable. We're financially the most at risk from sea level rise in the world. And so recognizing where that is and who is there is really important. So like one of the things that we have in Miami is that the coastal areas are the most desirable, also the most vulnerable, and it means that there are speculative investments going into the neighborhoods that are at the highest elevations, which are historically black, historically immigrant, historically affordable. So I just think that that's something to be aware of that we're dealing with.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to get into the economic development, but the Climate Resiliency Initiative, you were working with departments, public health, public works. Galen, you're probably working with a host of different departments. How do you incentivize or become a ringleader when so many of these departments cut across issues of climate resiliency and engage them in a way that there's cooperation and support and coordination?
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, at first it was a little bit challenging to kind of carve out where our area was, but I mean, I have to say that we're lucky in that we have very supportive leadership in the Board of Supervisors. That hasn't really been a battle, and I think more and more, especially extreme heat is one of the biggest things that we see in LA, at least visibly, as a hazard, and that's just become so apparent, both to our board but also to our departments. And it's you can't ignore it anymore, how it's really impacting things on the ground. And so I wouldn't say that we have to do a lot of work with our departments to get them to buy in to these issues. We have some great allies. But again, like the fact that they're seeing those real world impacts, cost impacts on their operations and staff and everything like that has helped really bring a lot of folks to the table. And the huge amounts of federal and state funding that are available doesn't hurt either. Obviously, the fact that a lot of those funding streams do have a lens of climate resilience and equity, which is very much aligned with our office's approach to a lot of these issues, helps. So,
Yep.
I would just say leadership is super important. So my mayor has made this a focus, and she continues to tell the directors of the departments that it is the focus. And so when this funding comes out, she said, she'll be like, I just saw this funding came out. Are you guys applying? It's for climate. It's for the community. And that just helps a ton.
And I had a pleasure of visiting Miami. And so you have organizations like MDI, Miami-Dade Innovation Authority, right, which were also born out of the mayor's leadership to carry those out.
Yeah, so Miami-Dade Innovation Authority is a new nonprofit. I am very hopeful about the connections with Larta here. And the goal is similarly to get innovations for the community commercialized locally. And it is not a county agency, but the mayor was the kind of visioning force after she went to Israel and saw their innovation authority. So why can't we have this here? And so we're working towards that. They have $9 million split from the private sector, philanthropy, and local government to do programs over the next 3 years. And we will see what happens. Keep an eye out on it. I won't get into too much right now.
Okay, thank you. So moving into food and food equity, Nick, I'm going to give you a chance to share what you're doing with regard to advanced hydroponics, transforming the community, and maybe even just sharing what your vision is. What is the desired future state that you see as you grow your organization and the type of impact you want to see in the community?
Yeah. So really the goal of Hyperlocal Farms is to limit the produce supply chain. Some of you may know the majority of the produce is grown over in California. Being in South Florida, it's a very harsh growing environment, so we don't have a lot of access to fresh produce, which means we have to ship it, 3,000 miles, and it loses that nutritional value and also loses shelf life when we ship it from California. So Hyperlocal Farms is trying to limit that supply chain mostly on the East Coast, so that we don't need to rely as much on the produce grown in traditional farms that oftentimes have a big issue with nutrient pollution as well. Being a native in South Florida, and I'm sure you've seen this in Miami too, we have a lot of algal blooms from other farms traditional farms in Florida, and those really do harm the marine environments and cause an entire fish kill for a lot of those populations. So our model, it's growing produce sustainably, so we don't have any nutrient pollution runoff from traditional farms, and also growing locally to ensure we have equitable access to fresh produce year-round, not just one time per year.
And then can you share a little bit about just sort of your connections with the community and schools? I know you have marine education as well as also a piece of what you're doing.
Yeah. So STEM education is a huge piece of what we do. We sell microgreens. So if you all come to the table tomorrow, we're going to have microgreens available to try from our farm in Florida. It's the only time I brought it over to California.
It survived the trip?
Yeah, somehow it survived the trip.
All right.
Kept it
We were
cold the
talking about
entire
that.
time. It's food safe too, so don't worry. But yeah, we have STEM education is a big portion of what we do. Part of Marine Education Initiative is the nonprofit that we run. Our DBA is Hyperlocal Farms, so that we can sell produce to local restaurants. So we sell the microgreens to local restaurants, and then the other leafy greens that we grow in our facility, that is completely donated to soup kitchens. So we've provided since April, since we opened our facility, we provided over 50,000 meals and educated over 500 students in South Florida. And that's from Miami-Dade all the way up to Palm Beach County.
Can I just add something there? Yeah. So I think what's super interesting about this and the Venture Fellows piece for me is that there is this kind of braiding, blending, whatever you want to call it, of finance, right? Yeah. So that people's missions, people are always coming up to me saying, I want to work in climate, but how do I get paid? And how do I make my company be successful? Because the regulations are serious, and the market conditions are challenging. But I think that this is a good example, and we need to look and see what's going to happen, right? But you got some really good philanthropy investment that has helped you get to the level, and then you can go out to the private sector. So,
and it wasn't short either. I mean, this took 7 years to get started, and we're honored to be a part of the Larta Institute and the Venture Fellows program. But it took a while to get to this point.
Yeah. I've seen the wall of your supporters as well, ever growing well. So how do you merge sort of the economic development piece of it, which sort of sits in the middle, right? You have policy and initiatives, and you have practitioners, but in the middle you have economic development initiatives. And how do you, as you develop plans and implement them, how do you keep the voice of entrepreneurs, startups, founders to inform some of your plans and some of the actions you're taking to make that a reality?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, our plan, the sustainability plan, and all of our work has really been built on very robust stakeholder engagement. And so we want to make sure that the business community and entrepreneurs are part of that. I think a lot of times when we're talking about sustainability issues, it does tend to, people immediately start to think about the businesses that are opposed to what we're doing. But it's really exciting to bring in entrepreneurs who are seeing opportunities out of the new policies and regulations. And we're trying to think really actively about that. We've got a Just Transition task force that's looking at sort of the next iteration of our economy when we're thinking about phasing out oil drilling and things like that. Where are those workers going to go? Where are the industries of the future that they can plug into and hopefully have use the skill sets that they've built and actually apply those to industries that we really want to see in Los Angeles. And we know that's necessary. We can't just push things out without bringing new stuff in. First of all, it's unsustainable, but also we risk having new industries coming in that are going to create new problems, right? So we always want to make sure that we're thinking about that actively. It's not just know what do we not want to see, but what do we actively, proactively want to bring in?
Galen, yourself?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is putting me in a job at a local government that's okay, we need to bring climate and economic development together. Mm-hmm. And I think in some ways in California, you guys are further along in the conversations because of state regulations, but we are very much benefiting from federal government support right now. We were just designated by the Economic Development Administration in South Florida, the whole 4-county region, as a climate resilient tech hub. We're the only one. There are 31 tech hubs around the country.
Congratulations.
Yes, woo, it's big. And it means I have to go and take a call this afternoon on writing a grant. But like, it's really exciting to get the designation. They literally said, this is a stamp of approval for the vision that you articulated, which is that we will be a global center for sustainable, resilient infrastructure. And it will create a flywheel from our universities and our partners locally and nationally so that we can build the solutions there. It's super exciting, and we are now applying for funding, and we have between 60 and 80 people showing up weekly from across the region, across all of the sectors on Zoom calls for an hour, hour and a half, and it's very exciting. It's a lot of it's a lot to make happen, and I think that there's stuff that we can learn here. And I also would say, like, we will need the support of California to keep it going in South Florida. I know I mentioned this before, but the way that we maintain the political support and the funding support is really critical. We see the waves in South Florida. There are really clear investment cycles, and my goal is for our community to be able to survive and be there through those economic cycles and then climate change, right? And we can't do it alone. We have to like bring in solutions.
Public-private sector. I think when I was there in Miami too, the Jeff Bezos made his announcement that he's relocating to South Florida, and that's what everybody was talking about at the time.
Yeah, I mean, he's boosting the economy by buying 2 mansions for over $70 million.
All right,
The real estate economy, yeah.
Yeah. No, and the real estate economy is a challenge, right? Like, we have the most to lose because we have really high real estate values that at low elevations. And since the pandemic, like in the last 4 years, average real estate prices have gone up. And so the median home price has gone up by like 90%, right? We're catching up to you, and it's very real.
So Nick, can you share with us, how can we, in your journey, how can we partner with you? What are some of the needs? Whenever we have an entrepreneur, I really try to give you a platform to talk about those kinds of issues, how people can engage with you, what are the needs, how can we support the vision that you have for Hyperlocal Farms?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, if you're ever in the area, we're situated in Delray Beach, so if you're ever near there, come by for a tour. Happy to give you one and give you some free microgreens as well. But in terms of future expansion, we're trying to essentially create hyperlocal farms in various metropolitan areas, primarily on the East Coast. So our next location is going to be Miami. We're hoping to find about a 10,000 to 15,000 square foot facility. If we do so, we'll be able to donate 1 million meals per year, just in Miami. And then we can expand to other cities and elsewhere, even in LA if you guys are interested, but that's in the future. But yeah, in terms of future expansion, it's really just finding space, finding funding, and then just partnering with local schools and local organizations and even government entities.
Thank you. I did say we're going to talk about heat. Heat accounts for more deaths than any other kind of weather-related phenomena, and that's sort of, there's a linkage between Miami and Los Angeles. Miami, you just named, I think, the first chief heat officer, and here there was a heat action plan that the County Board of Supervisors pushed through. So I want to give each of you, Rita and Galen, a chance to talk about heat and what does that mean? What does it mean to have a chief heat officer? What will that heat officer be doing? And here in LA, what does the heat action plan look like?
I'll just quickly say, so for context, Jane Gilbert was the first chief heat officer. There's some like naming rights about who got it first, but it really came out of a conversation between our mayor, Daniela Levine Cava, and Adrian Arsht, who is a philanthropist. And they said, we really need to elevate heat. And it's something we heard from our community. I can say this as a person I did my PhD in Miami, and I was like, hey, you guys, we're really worried about sea level rise. And folks in the communities were like, yes, I understand that, but it is very hot out there. And it is dangerous when I bring a small child to the bus stop. And I heard that years ago, but we're responding now. And I think it has fundamentally changed the conversation. And I know you guys are kind of in lockstep. It's one of the ways that I would say it's on heat and transportation where we're most linked with LA.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've had conversations with folks in Miami about that, and the city of LA has a chief heat officer now, and the county certainly, considered something like that. But like I was saying, it is one of the most visible climate hazards. It really impacts people day to day. So even as we've been talking about all these other hazards that we're concerned about, heat is on everybody's mind, and I think that has really driven the conversation a lot to get people to focus more on climate resilience and making sure that we're helping our communities adapt to that. So like you mentioned, Carlos, the Board of Supervisors they directed us to do heat action plan. So it's kind of exciting because we're going to be working on that probably over the next year. We've put out sort of a framework of what we want it to cover. And that was just submitted to our board. But I think over the next year, you'll be hearing hopefully more from us about creating that heat action plan for the whole county.
Right. And I think we have one of the companies in our Venture Fellows program called ThermoShade, which we'll be presenting tomorrow, has a solution that they're highlighting to address that. We'll leave it there. That'll sort of be a little bit of a teaser for the next couple days. Please give a hand to the panel here for their time and opportunity to hear from them.